Hi everyone, I'm Mark McCord, Chief of Party of the USAID Economic Security Program, and thank you for attending this webinar. I want to talk to you today about leadership. You might think it's an overused word and that everything about leadership has already been said. Maybe you're right. Or maybe you'll come away from this webinar with one or two different ideas about what leadership is and what your role as a leader could be. Today we're going to look at 10 ways to identify a leader. 10 characteristics, if you will, of a leader. And I want to jump right in and start with the first one. Leadership is not easy, and it's not for everyone. Believe me, I know this firsthand. I've run organizations in many different areas of the world in my career, but I started my career in the United States, running economic development authorities in metropolitan areas. And when I ran the Colorado Springs Economic Development Authority, I can tell you that leadership there wasn't easy. Colorado Springs, Colorado is a wonderful city, but it is a city that at many times is divided ideologically. And I was told when I went there, if you want to be a leader in Colorado Springs, you better get ready because they're going to come after you every day. And they did. They came after us every day, whether we did something right or whether we did something wrong. It didn't stop different elements of the population from coming after us as leaders, or me specifically as the head of the Chamber of Commerce and the Economic Development Authority. It wasn't easy. There were times when, believe me, I would love to have quit. But one thing that I always knew is that your mettle as a leader is tested. And the more your mettle is tested, the more you're refined, and the more the edge of your leadership is sharpened. But should everyone be a leader? Absolutely not. Because if everyone tries to lead, nothing gets done. There are those who are outstanding followers. And if you have just a few moments, I want you to log on to YouTube and watch a video called The First Follower. Because sometimes it's better to be the first person to follow a leader than it is to be the leader themselves. Because the first follower is what generates momentum. So watch that video. Just type first follower into YouTube and you'll find it. The second characteristic of leadership I want to discuss is that if you can't follow, you can't lead. I already talked about this first follower mentality, but I can tell you some of the best leaders that I've ever known were great followers first. And some of the worst leaders I've ever known refused to follow. Following takes sometimes more talent and more focus than leading. It takes humility. It takes purpose. It takes the ability to learn. It requires someone to say, I don't have all the answers, so I'm going to follow someone and learn, and perhaps it will make me a better leader. There are also times that even as a leader, when following is not only the right thing to do, it's the only thing to do to address a situation. Because leaders don't always have the answers. And any leader that thinks they have the answer, or they're the only one with the answer, is typically not a good leader. The third characteristic I want to talk about is that the context and the profile of leadership is changing. In the past, there was a very hierarchical view of leadership. Leaders were elected, or they were the CEOs, or they were the supervisors. But social media and just the way we live our lives in general now has changed everything in leadership. Influencers are now leaders, or at least leaders to those that follow them. All it takes to be a leader now is to be able to log onto a computer and to get people to follow you. Now, does that meet the technical definition that some of us grew up believing about leadership? Absolutely not. But it's a reality. And because of the context of leadership has changed and the modality of leadership has changed, attitudes about leadership have also changed. Millennials look at leadership very different than those from my generation. We had a very, as I said before, hierarchical view in my generation of leadership. There was a boss and there were workers. But subsequent generations, including millennials, feel that this leadership curve should be flattened and that everyone has something to contribute to leadership. And I believe that's the case. And I believe that a leader has to adapt their actions and adapt their mentality to the current realm of leadership, the current context of leadership. And the COVID-19 crisis is even going to change this more, because many world leaders have been exposed as not to have the answers, not to understand even the questions to ask, while those who stood in the background and who were characterized as not being leaders were the ones that stepped out and really excelled during this time. Those people sometimes that are forgotten are in the background, that work at our shops or that drive our ambulances or that work in our hospitals. They stepped up and led in a time when world leaders had no answers whatsoever, because the context of leadership has changed and will continue to change. The fourth thing I want to address is that leaders have to own their choices. We don't like to hear this sometimes because we live in a society now where there's always an excuse for non-performance, or there's always a reason why something didn't go the way you hoped it would go. But the reality is that a real leader owns their choices. I've made good choices as a leader. I've made bad choices. But I can tell you that whatever choices I've made, I had to own them. I can share with you a choice that I made as a leader that had very, very difficult and detrimental circumstances. I won't, because the experience is really almost too painful to share in a forum like this. But I can tell you this, I learned something from that. And the main thing I learned is that I made that choice. And I had to live with that choice as a leader. And we all do. So don't think that as a leader you can make just an off-the-cuff decision and expect there not to be repercussions or expect there not to be responsibility. There is, and that responsibility as a leader is your responsibility. The fifth thing I want to address is that leaders learn from those around them. Wow, I've learned from so many people in my career, starting off even in high school. But I want to share one with you. When I was in university, I was far from home. I came from a town of 158 people, if you can believe that. Very tiny little place in rural Oklahoma in the United States. And I went to university. I was pretty far from home. It was not possible for me to go home every weekend. And so I felt very much out of place there. Coming from this tiny school, the day that I came to campus, I was so excited. And by day 3, I was terrified and wanted to go home. And I remember walking into a class, a writing class, English literature class. And it was the one thing that I really thought I could do, because in high school, I had spent a lot of time writing and I never received anything but an A on my writing assignments. And so that was the one thing that I believed I could excel in. And so I went into this class. It was taught by a professor named Dr. Lang, Dr. Elsie Lang. And on the first day, she assigned a paper. And I was so happy because writing was easy for me. And so I wrote that paper and I turned it in the next period. And a couple of weeks later, I was so excited when she was handing the papers back. She came to my desk and she laid it down, and I looked down to see my A. But it wasn't an A. It was a C minus. And even worse than that, on the paper, there was a note that says, "See me." Well, that's not what you want to see, especially the C minus. But then on top of that, the professor wants you to see her after class. Not a good situation. So I waited till everyone left. I went to her desk, and I'll never forget what Dr. Lang said. She looked from her little half glasses. She had them down on her nose like this, and she looked at me. She said, "Mr. McCord, I've checked into you a little bit and know that you come from this tiny school. You're pretty far from home. You're stuck here most of the time, I think, right?" I said, "Right." And she said, "And you fashion yourself to be a great writer, yes?" And I said, "Well, I thought so." And she looked at me and shook her head and said, "Well, you're not." And it was like someone took a pin and just popped my balloon, and all the air immediately leaked out of me. I was demoralized. But then she said something that would change my life. She said, "But you could be a great writer. And if you want to be a great writer, I will help you. And I'll make a bargain with you right now if you'll accept it. And that is, every Friday, you come to my home. My husband and I don't have any children, and we're great cooks. And we eat as a family every night, or as a couple every night. So on Friday night, you come over, we'll make a home-cooked meal, but it's going to cost you a paper. And after the meal, I'll look at the paper. I'll make corrections. That's how we'll teach you to write. Deal or no deal?" Well, I took the deal. And I went to her home, ate her food, which was great, by the way, turned in my paper. And afterwards, she took a red pen and she reviewed it. "Oh, no, that's not right. No, no. Oh, I'm so disappointed. No." And she just butchered that paper. And I was so demoralized. But she said, "Come back next Friday with another paper." And I did. And next Friday, it was the same thing. She just butchered that paper. And this happened for months on end, until after a period of time, I'll never forget the night, I turned in that paper, and we'd eaten a meal, and we were sitting in the living room. And she went through that paper with her red pen ready. And she turned page 1 and page 2 and page 3 and page 4 and page 5. And I'll never forget her putting her pen down and looking at me with a tear on her cheek and saying, "Congratulations, Mr. McCord, you can write." That changed my life. That made me realize that I need to learn every day and could learn every day. And it showed me that leaders must learn every day. We have to learn from those around us if we want to be an effective leader. The sixth thing about leadership I want to talk about is that leaders have a vision, not a dream. A vision is a dream with an action step. You know why most dreamers never accomplish anything? Because they're not willing to do the work. Dreaming is exactly that. It's a dream. I wanted to be a great baseball player at one time in my life, an American baseball player. But number one, I didn't have the talent. But number two, I wasn't willing to do the work. As a leader, if you're not willing to do the work, then all you'll ever have is dreams. As a matter of fact, you'll probably never be a leader because all you'll ever have is dreams. A real leader has vision. They know that what they're getting ready to do is going to be hard. There are going to be a lot of obstacles. But they're willing to take that journey to fulfill their vision. And they'll never give up. I have a good friend who's an entrepreneur that started 5 companies. The first 4 times he went broke. Either bad idea, wrong timing, wrong demographic, whatever it was. He lost everything 4 times. On the 5th time, he became a multi-millionaire. My question to you is this. What if my friend had quit after number 2 or number 3 or number 4? Then his dream would have gone up in smoke. But guess what? He didn't have a dream. He had a vision. And because he had a vision, he continued to press forward until that vision was realized. And now he teaches entrepreneurship all over the world. The 7th thing I want to share with you is that leaders aren't afraid to fail. As a matter of fact, they're afraid not to fail. It's true. Right now, if you want to be a leader, or if you want to really accomplish anything in life, you'd better hope and pray every single day. Listen to me. Hope and pray every single day that you fail enough to learn to succeed. Leadership is about failure more than it is even success. You show me a great leader, and I'll show you someone who's not failed once or twice, but failed repeatedly and publicly in many cases. And yet, they overcame that failure. They learned from it, and they became something and someone that could lead others. The 8th thing I want to share is that leaders listen more than they speak. Wow, this has been a tough one for me in my life because I like to talk. I've always felt like there's power in words, and I always wanted to get those words out there. But the fact is that that was a failure of mine in many cases because I needed to listen, and leaders need to listen. That's why so many politicians and business leaders today that are called leaders really aren't the type of leaders that people want to follow because they think they have all the answers. They won't listen. They want to push forward and implement their ideas in a vacuum when they should sit and listen, collect information, use that information, learn, and be the kind of leaders who are willing not just to hear, very important designation, not just to hear, but to listen. The 9th element of leadership I want to talk about is that leaders elevate those around them. Wow, this is a big concept. Leaders simply make others better. They make everyone around them feel like they can achieve something. Years ago, I heard a story about a man in Minnesota named Paul Asp. Paul Asp had a dream, and his dream was to build a Viking ship and to sail that ship to Norway. And so Paul Asp went to the forest in the state of Minnesota, and he cut trees, and he began to build this huge Viking ship. And the people in town thought Paul had gone crazy. They openly laughed at him. His children were embarrassed to even go to school because their friends were making fun of them for this vision that their father had. But Paul Asp built that Viking ship. And he had that ship pulled to one of the lakes that provided an entry point to the Great Lakes. And the story goes that most of the town showed up the day he did that to inaugurate that ship and to begin his trip to Norway because they wanted to see him fail. They thought that either he would come to his senses and turn back or that the ship would just sink. The ship was cut away from the dock, and Paul Ass began to sail. And you know what I believe? That as Paul Ass sailed away, and that ship got smaller and smaller and smaller on the horizon, that all of those people on the dock realized that this man had done something they'd never do, that he had vision while they had a dream, that he put into action what he wanted to do and that they never had. The end of the story is this: Paul Ass did sail that ship to Norway, but he died tragically before he was able to sail back. And the people in that town who had mocked him and laughed at him raised money to bring that ship back, and now it sits as a memorial in their town to a man who elevated everybody around him, who made people believe in themselves, who saw someone ordinary do something extraordinary and realized they could do the same. You can too, and your job as a leader is to elevate those around you. So the 10th element of leadership I want to discuss is that leaders know when it's time to turn leadership over to somebody else. As important as it is to know when to lead, it's as important, or even more important, to know when your time is done and when you need to turn leadership over to someone else. So many places in the world, I've worked with associations and organizations who literally are dying because the person who founded that organization is so invested they refuse to give up leadership. I've seen companies that say the same way. One of the best things you can do as a leader is to train people around you to take over when your time has passed, and to understand when someone else can take an organization or a company to a place that you can't. As a leader, you have to know that sometimes you can take an organization or a company to one point, but someone else has to take it to the next point. And if you continue to forge on and refuse to give up the leadership role, you can lose all the traction and all the momentum that you ever built. So those are the 10 elements of leadership, but I'm going to give you a bonus. I'm going to give you one more, an 11th aspect of leadership. And that's that a leader knows that everything he or she wants comes with sacrifice. I'm going to end with this. I have a friend who climbed Mount Everest. It took him 3 times. The first time, he made it almost a quarter of the way up and had to turn back because of bad weather. The second time, he pressed forward. He came within literally hundreds of meters of the summit and was forced to turn back and almost died. On his 3rd attempt, he made it to the top of Mount Everest. It costs a lot of money to climb Mount Everest. It takes a lot of sacrifice. It takes a lot of training. It takes a lot of time being away from your family. It takes a lot of effort to do that. And my friend said, all that sacrifice, all that effort, everything that I went through, the frostbite, the lung problems, the exhaustion, it all became worth it when I stood on that summit, because I figured something out, that everything I wanted was on the top of that mountain. All of my dreams were at the bottom of the mountain, but all my accomplishments were at the top. And that's why in his office, behind his desk, is a huge photo of him standing on the summit of Mount Everest, because he got it. He realized that nothing happens for a leader without sacrifice. And nothing will happen for you without sacrifice. You want to be a leader? There are a lot more than these 11 things you have to know. But hopefully, today, you've learned a little bit about some of the aspects of leadership. I'm Mark McCord, Chief of Party of the USAID Economic Security Program. Thanks for attending attending this webinar.